So Bob and I talk about the early history of the Allmans. We do go past that a bit. We talk about Dickey taking over after Duane's death and what the Allmans did later in the later 70s and even into the 1990s. But it is a book that focuses on Duane Allman because he was the guy who started the band, even though Gregg did the vocals and he wrote some of the better songs. It was really Duane's band. He was a young guy, a great guitar player. He did some session work before he started the band in Georgia with his brother. Dickey came on eventually. He's from Florida. So there are some strong Florida connections. The band kind of got started in Florida, but then when they really hit it, they were in Macon, Georgia, and there's a museum there now and everything. And that is where Duane died at a very young age, just as the Allmans were really becoming well known, and they were able to do a few albums with him. There's a definite break after Duane's death. They kind of become more of a country rock group rather than a acid rock or even hard rock band. Southern rock, we call it now, but at the time that phrase really wasn't used. But Duane was really kind of a purist. He just liked playing his guitar and playing with bands and obviously playing live. The Fillmore East is a double album that I've listened to for a while, and I was always an Allman Brothers fan. When I first started listening to classic rock, you would hear the hits, and I had a greatest hits for a while, but I don't know, in the last 4 or 5 years, I started getting into the early Allman Brothers because I figured, well, if you have the greatest hits and maybe the Fillmore East, you kind of have everything, or you have a lot of it. But I've really enjoyed the early albums. There are 2 albums that they did before they did the Fillmore East. And even though they're more of a live band, they're known for their live sets. I really do like those initial albums, and a lot of the stuff later, obviously, too. I think there's some underrated stuff from the mid 70s, like Win, Lose, or Draw. But, they were strong throughout the 70s and broke up for a while in the 80s. So they have been a band, or they were a band that existed a lot longer without Duane. It was really only a couple of years. But he left a very strong imprint on the band and on popular music. Bob's book, I am enjoying reading it. It moves along really quickly. It is very tightly written, a lot of great quotations. So I am enjoying reading that. So I would definitely recommend the book, whether you like the Allmans or not. But certainly if you do like the Allmans, you should check this out. So where are you right now?
Nashville.
Oh, okay.
I'm in Franklin, actually. I'm just south.
Oh, that's Nashville. Right. Yeah, I looked you up on LinkedIn, maybe, and you're not too far away, right?
No, like 25 miles south of Nashville.
Okay. Has that helped you with your music knowledge, you think, being kind of close to Nashville?
I mean, I wish. It seems super sexy, but no, not really.
Yeah.
It's been fun because, the music's here. There's a lot going on. The institutions here are great, and I'm a museum guy. So, that's always cool. But, like when I lived here, even when I moved here in 2007 from Orlando, everybody's like, oh, there's tons of history in Nashville. I'm like, yeah, there's tons of history everywhere. It's
right.
So not really. And in my research, I didn't do a lot of interviews and stuff because everything I was covering was from 73 and before ish. And everybody said everything I wanted them to say. So the proximity to bands touring meant nothing to me too,
The Allman Brothers are not a Nashville band anyway, so.
Not necessarily deep Nashville roots, but no, they're not, in that classic sense, they are not a Nashville band, no.
Yeah, but it's easy to kind of still think they're still playing. Like they're still out there, but they're not, and they haven't been for a while now.
8 years next month.
Okay. Well, I mean, Gregg died a few years ago, and obviously Duane's been gone for a long time now. I mean, obviously you've been an Allman Brothers fan for a long time, and you are from Florida, and the band is kind of, speaking of Nashville, there's a Tennessee connection, but really they're really a Florida band, right?
They were formed in Florida. I think most people would call them a Georgia band, but 2/3 of the original band were born in Florida.
Yeah.
And Barry Oakley had relocated to Florida, not many years before then, but even in the book, I call him a Southerner because he left Chicago, went south, and really never looked back. The South was kind of what he expected. So yeah, the band founded in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. Duane and Gregg are from Daytona Beach. Dickey Betts is from West Palm Beach, or Palm Beach County, I think. I don't know if he's from West Palm or just Palm Beach County. He was born there. That's about 20 miles south of where I grew up in a little town called Stewart. And then Butch Trucks is from Jacksonville, which is where the band formed in March of '69.
Yeah, that's interesting because Skinner is a Florida band too, in a lot of ways. I mean, I know I'm not sure their pedigree exactly, but Tom Petty, he's from Florida. Like, there's a lot of these guys that came out of Florida, and I mean, I guess the Allmans, to some degree, they are considered a Georgia band because that's kind of when they started hitting it big. They were in Georgia then, right?
Yeah. So to sort of put a little context to the story that you're telling, I'm a Floridian, Colin. I wanted Florida to be this grand sort of inspiration for the Allman Brothers, but it really is the South. And I'll say it to you this way, because when I started unpacking this whole thing, and you know this when you've done research too, it's really musicians all over the country, but all over the South were the Allmans were a part of this gigantic movement that I call it kind of the third generation of rock and rollers, in that it was after that first wave of rock and roll in the 50s, late 50s. And then you have that a lot of what Teen Idols and those sorts of things. And then that third generation, which comes after the British invasion or about the same time it's happening, all these bands form up, and all of the guys in the original Allman Brothers were in bands in this era as teens and then in their early 20s. So back to your thing. They played Gainesville a lot, where Tom Petty was from, and Petty remembers seeing Stephen Stills was there for a time. Two of the Eagles guitarists, Don Felder and Bernie Leadon, are both from Gainesville and had some cross paths with Duane and Gregg. Skinner is 100% from Jacksonville. I think they lived there the whole time. They're a couple years behind. All of those bands are a couple years behind the Allman Brothers. And really, one of the things I found, and I knew this, but to what extent I didn't, the Allman Brothers, now this is lowercase brothers, or the brothers Allman, Duane and Gregg, really did inspire all kinds of people they came across in Florida and throughout the South, because of their dedication to their music. So in Play All Night, I've got Gary Rossington, I quote him, I've got Petty in there, and others who just talk about encountering Duane and Gregg in 65, 66, before they had even gone to California, and how blown away they were by all of that. So it's the same, I would say the Gainesville guys, because almost all of them, I think all of them left and basically went to California, which is what Duane did and Gregg did too in 67, and failed miserably. The Gainesville guys all went, but that's, I think, 4 Rock and Roll Hall of Famers from Hogtown, that's pretty amazing to me, beyond the fact that all this other music scene had happened in and around Florida. And just put a cap on that. Florida's special, but so is Georgia, so is Alabama, so is Mississippi, I'm parochial when I say it's Southern, but that's that strain that stays in the music. And Florida was, a lot different in the 60s than it is today, although it was growing to what it is today. And all of these stories are in these little, honestly, it's the suburban South where so much of this happens, or it's not true rural South, but these little tiny towns like Muscle Shoals, like Macon. Jacksonville wasn't a tiny town at all. It was a huge town, actually. Orlando, Winter Haven, Gainesville, those types of towns are where all of this is coming from in that era. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, and it seems like Florida kind of gets neglected. And even a band like Skinner, if you asked a lot of people, they probably think they're from Alabama because of Sweet Home Alabama.
And yes, I do think Florida gets overlooked, and partially because, well, there's a lot of factors. I've been studying or dealing with Florida history my entire life. Florida getting short shrift is kind of a theme that often runs through that, to me at least. And again, in this case, for sure, the Allman Brothers were birthed in Florida, but they moved to Macon, Georgia within 2-3 weeks of forming, and that was home base, and really remains sort of Allman Brother home base to this day, though the band doesn't live there. I don't know when the last person moved from Macon was, but it was years ago. But Macon is pretty much called the, kind of ground zero for this whole thing.
Yeah. And where did Duane die?
Duane died in Macon.
Okay. And he was 24?
24 years old. He had just gotten back from rehab in Buffalo, New York, with several of the band. Was home for a very brief time, took off on his motorcycle and was gone within a matter of, I think, hours.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a tragic story, but you kind of open the book, you're talking about it and how, like, we so often tell this story starting with him dying and then kind of moving from there. But it's crazy to think how young he was when he was starting, not only when he died, but when he was starting. I mean, he was only 16 when he was pretty much playing professionally or semi-professionally. Like, maybe just talk a bit about like the prodigy that was Duane Allman. I mean, Gregg eventually joins the band, but it's really Duane's band. But by the time he has the accident, I mean, he had obviously been with the Allmans, but he was doing a lot of other things before they really gelled as a band. So maybe just kind of talk about that.
So Duane was a real force. And I remember when I was working on the manuscript and I had a friend of mine editing it for me. It was what I used my relief money for last year. I was like, you know what? I'm putting this into the creative economy. I want my book to be as good as possible, going to the reviewers and everything else. So going back to the Duane is killed in the first paragraph part, that's Duane's daughter, Galadriel, who said that in her book. And actually one of my dissertation committee members and advisors wrote to me, do not do this. I thought it was a great little warning that I don't sort of lead with that, because it is true. You think about somebody who died at 24 on a motorcycle, rock and roll star, right? It's the, live fast, die young, leave a good looking corpse kind of thing. But that's not the story. The story is this force of nature musician who my colleague who was editing it wrote me, and she said, he just sounds like he's wise beyond his years. Which, as a writer and as a historian, you're like, okay, do I say that? Like I think that, but, so he got the bug early, like a lot of us do. Quick story. Gregg got the first guitar. Duane took it so much that their mom bought the second guitar for them. Both of them are left-handed and played right-handed, which I think is really interesting. As a right-hander who's been playing guitar for 40 years, I'm nowhere near what either of those guys could do at a very young age. Duane was playing, in his early teens in and around Daytona Beach, on the Daytona Beach Pier, which was the kind of happening spot. Then he and Gregg both, they would go over to the black side of town after hours and play music. They spent a lot of time in and around the Black community. They hit the road right after Gregg finished high school in 1965 as the Allman Joys and puttered around. They went to Nashville in 66 to record under John D. Loudermilk, big time songwriter. Tobacco Road is probably his most famous song. Recorded some singles for Dial Records, Buddy Killen at Bradley's Barn and Lebanon, which is a pretty famous studio here in Middle Tennessee. And it flopped, and they were covers. My mentor, Tennessee State historian Van West, who was my dissertation advisor, he really hammered me on this. From 65 to about 68, Duane was a cover artist. He was a damn good one. But when you listen to the music that has come out from that era, from those guys, it's not there's not a lot of Allman Joys material. There's a live show from 66, and the studio cuts. It's good stuff. It's very good stuff. There's a reason it didn't hit, partially is because everything sounded exactly like another song. For example, they recorded Willie Dixon. Well, it's a Willie Dixon written song, but Helen Wolf's Spoonful, Duane called it a terrible psychedelic rendition. They copied Paul Butterfield Band's version of it. So they didn't even have like their own version. When you fast forward to the Allman Brothers, when they did Trouble No More by Muddy Waters, that is a completely different sounding song than what Muddy Waters did. And that was the real difference. Duane was a cover of really, really, really awesome guitarist and cover artist. And when they got to LA with Hourglass, which I'm skipping a lot here, but they eventually go to Los Angeles and record these 2 albums with Liberty Records. And I mean, the band, those guys hated him forever. I have friends who are like, you should listen. It's a lot better than you think, and blah, blah, blah. I don't care for it very much. But they go to LA and make 2 records, follow the music industry line. They dress up in costume like they're told. There's a famous picture of Duane with what looks like a doily around his neck. You know, they're looking very pseudo psychedelic. I call it like pop psychedelia. And then he quits he quits when they're recording their second album, comes back, finishes it. And then when they tour, actually they toured and recorded in Muscle Shoals at Fame, recorded some demos. And they run back to their producer at Liberty, their folks, and say, this is what we want to do. And they just rejected it. And Duane said, that's it. I'm going back down south. And then that starts a 3-week period where Duane moves to Florida, joins up with Butch Trucks on the 31st of February for a bit. Gregg somehow joins them, and they record and they play. And then Gregg takes back off for LA, ... Duane ends up going to Muscle Shoals and basically finds his way into the studio. So from September 68, that happened in September 68. He quit the band, recorded with Butch. Gregg left, and he goes to Muscle Shoals like in 3 weeks. It's pretty crazy. That's where Duane made a name for himself. Eventually in October, he gets a chance to play with Wilson Pickett on Hey Jude, and that catapulted the whole thing for him. Duane's studio career was really pretty short. He was a full-time studio guy from, probably October, November of 68 until maybe until February of 69, when he leaves and eventually in March forms the Allman Brothers. So he did more stuff after that. Loan Me a Dime with Boz Scaggs came after he joined the Allman Brothers. Layla comes a year afterwards when he played with Clapton. But for the most part, after about 69, 70, Duane is pretty much only with the Allman Brothers. He does record with Delaney and Bonnie and tours with them some, but that was his main creative outlet once he discovered that group of guys and put them together.
Okay.
I got your book today. I was reading the first chapter because you did send me an intro and stuff. Yeah, congratulations on that. Looks good.
Thank you.
You got the paperback, so that's good.
I wanted a nice dust cover. All my other books have been I've had a hardcover of them, but you know what? At this stage, man, it's done. I'm happy.
Right.
I'm happy.
Yeah.
I'm ready for the fallout at this point. It's all been going through in my mind. I finally turned it in December. February was when I, signed off for the last time. Maybe it was March, but anyway.
When did you start it?
So the dissertation started, the book in earnest. The first time I remember saying, I turned in the proposal sometime in the summer of 2020. And I dicked around with it for the first couple months. That was a really crazy ass time with all of us anyway. It was really crazy for me. I had a lot of stuff going on with my brother and sister. And so, sometime like October, November, I really started digging in of 2020. And then I finished the final draft. I'm one of those people, I like to go to somewhere and write in the place where something happened, or at least go and experience it. So I went to Macon and rented an Airbnb in the beginning of February 2021, and really kind of banged out the last of the first draft. And then I turned it in May of 2021. and then got back reviews. And I think my final deadline was like November 1 of last year. And I went down to, I went down to Muscle Shoals. I didn't do this on purpose. I did go to Muscle Shoals on purpose, but I actually was finishing writing the book on the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of Duane's death, while I was sitting in Muscle Shoals finishing this book. Colin, I do plot those things out. I am pretty intentional. That was a complete freaking accident. And it was a little bit eerie when I put it all together for me. So you asked the question, let's say July of 2020 to December 1 of 2021 was the sort of manuscript period where it was only that. Constantly cranking out. And then there were large periods of time without any activity as reviewers were doing their thing and I was processing in my brain.
That's pretty quick as a turnaround. I mean, I know you said it was based on your dissertation, but I mean, sometimes it can take years even once it's accepted. I mean, I don't know when your dissertation started, but sometimes it'd be like a 10-year process.
Yeah.
Plus 3 with the publisher.
I'm 50 years, almost 50. So I don't have that process that a younger scholar has to go from this to that,
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest with you, Colin, when I was 25, of course, I didn't have I just had a bachelor's at that point. I hadn't even gone to grad school. And a lot of folks I knew were finishing with their PhDs and publishing. And I was like, oh, kind of thing. So I wanted University Press of Florida because I really believe in university presses, and that is my home state. And I like their books. I've always liked their music books. So, I gave them a pretty finished product. And I think having published several things, and I'm certain you turned your dissertation into a book. When I wrote that thing, and it's up here somewhere, all 500 pages of it, I thought it was like anything else I'd ever done, 80% done when I finished the draft. 40%, maybe 50.
Yeah. I didn't have that experience so much with the Cash book. They are a lot more hands off, but I think with the first book, it was a dissertation, and then I cut it down a lot for the manuscript, but then I think they still said, all right, we're going to publish this, but you got to cut like 25,000 words or something. I mean, it's a lot. So the total book, I mean, it's only like 200 pages of text, but it's a lot harder sometimes to cut than it is to add. But with the first book, they don't want it to be that long anymore, I don't think. I mean, maybe back in the late 60s, you could kind of publish a 500-page first book, but not anymore. I'm sorry, I don't have your CV in front of me. Where'd you do your PhD?
I did my PhD at Middle Tennessee State University, which is in Murfreesboro, so about 40 minutes away from me.
Okay.
So I did my PhD and my master's, both of them part-time. I was actually working in the field, in the history museum field, and just chipped away at it forever. And I studied under Van West, who's the Tennessee State historian, and just a tremendous historian, scholar, and mentor of people. I went to him it was 2012. My mom had just passed away. Well, maybe you don't, but my midlife crisis was graduate school in guitar. So my first one was actually. My mom had passed away very suddenly, and I was like, why am I waiting on doing this goal that I've had for a long time? So I went out to talk to Van, said I wanted to do a book on the Allman Brothers, and he was like, let's do it.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Well, you were mentioning word count. 144,000 words down to 85 was my goal.
Okay. Yeah. That's a lot of cutting. But I find it kind of interesting. I feel like maybe guys our age or people who've been out of grad school for a while are starting to write more of these kinds of books about the classic rock period or classic country period, whatever, like 60s, 70s, which is not anything anyone was doing in grad school when I was there. I went to kind of a more conservative program, but I had a friend who was doing something on jazz, but that was like early jazz. But now I seem to be seeing more of these types of books, books about Dylan or the Allmans or whoever, like a lot of kind of big music groups are getting academic attention, which I think is important because there's a lot of not so great literature about rock music and stuff. I'm sure you've read those kind of biographies. Not a lot of great sources or just kind of sensational or whatever. But obviously now that, I mean, Duane's been gone for 50 years. The band hasn't been touring since Gregg died. Dickey's still around, but they're kind of done, I guess.
They're done.
So you can kind of write now, everything's kind of behind you, which is a nice advantage to have. But obviously your interest in the Allmans goes back a ways, right? When do you first remember listening to them?
I can't recall the first time I heard them. Actually, that's the first time I heard them as the Allman Brothers. I was driving my my mother's Oldsmobile Custom Cruiser 86 station wagon. You know, pretty much goes from here till the back of the house. You know, I was and the song Jessica was on the radio. I write about this in the preface. It's got this real bouncy sound. It's sort of modeled on a Django Reinhardt type song, that the famous jazz guitarist. And I was like, oh, that must be the Grateful Dead, because it was instrumental, it was flowy and this and that. I had no idea. I was 16 years old probably. And then he said, oh, that's the Allman Brothers with Jessica. I was like, oh, I like that. Forgot about it. Prior to that, I had bought out Fillmore East on cassette when I was a blues hound as a little kid. That's my first guitar on the wall back there. And man, the blues just grabbed me. And so I was just soaking it up. And you know, when you're a kid, everything is possible. So I grabbed that Fillmore East on cassette, and I don't even remember listening to it much, but I just remember going, it was far too much for my little immature ears. So fast forward to college. I don't know if you did this, Colin, but a lot of us did. BMG and Columbia House, man, you could just rack up CDs if you worked your system right. So I would just go in the catalog and sort of pick stuff that I wanted to hear. And I did a lot of like greatest hits and live albums, because I love live records. Greatest hits would give you a nice sort of thing. The Allman Brothers, they're not a hits band. They're not a singles band. And it just freaked me out. It just knocked me on my ass. This CD with a denim blue jeans cover. I played it over and over and over again. And the back, like 4 songs, you know, it's like, I think it has Liz Reed and Dreams and Blue Sky and Little Martha. So you know, let's say 93, I just got bit by this bug. They were, you know, I think part of it was they were still on the road. I got to see them pretty quickly after that. And I realized they were not a nostalgia act. And I was like, oh. And then every time I'd see them, I'd have a good time, meet more people. And I got bit by the bug hard.
I mean, around that time, like 94, they kind of have a comeback, right? With I can't think of the album name, but
so that was the last album. Okay, so the timing goes this: they broke up in '82, and it was a mess, and with the absolute nadir of the band. They reformed in '89 for their 20th anniversary, and I put in the epilogue. You know, it was a remarkably productive period for the Allman Brothers Band. That was by '94. That was the 3rd album they released, which was Where It All Begins.
That's it.
They had done 3 studio records. That was the 3rd, 2 live albums. And they were back on the road. They headlined the Horde tour that year. But they toured every year that I was a fan until 2014, 93 to 2014. I don't know that I saw them every year. I had kids in the middle of that, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, they were, I mean, I caught them going up toward a second peak. And that last band from 2001 to 2014 with Warren Haynes and Derek Trucks on guitar, that was, I call it the second grade era. They were killers every night. They were playing Allman Brothers music, and they were Allman Brothers. They weren't making a lot of new music. They had done a lot of that in the 90s, and then they just kind of stopped, which is, it's too bad. World needed another record from that group, from that last band for sure.
So Dickey left when?
2000.
2000. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what does he. I think he still plays sometimes, but he doesn't tour, does he?
No, he went out on tour. He did some runs in 2018, which I just saw his son Duane Betts put something out. That's probably the last time he'll play live. He had retired sometime in 2014. I think it was 2014. And then he played a couple shows toward the end, and Duane, his son, was the musical director. It was pretty cool moment. I caught none of them. I'm kind of pissed now. But I saw Dickey quite a bit from, 93 to 2000 when he left the band. And then in the 2000s, I would see him pretty semi-regular. He toured, those guys are road warriors, man. I think part of the reason, Butch Trucks committed suicide in January of 2017, and Gregg died that May. And, when Butch died, that was probably, everybody knew that was it, because he was such a foundation. But all of those guys stayed on the road till the very end.
Gregg, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I saw him, the last time I saw him, I didn't know he was dying of cancer. But, I saw him sometime in the year before he died. Was the last time I saw him. Jaimoe opened for him. It was turns out to be a pretty cool full circle moment for me.
Yeah. No, I know it's weird. It's like maybe 30 or 40 years ago, people were thinking these guys are just going to stop one day, but apparently none of them have. I mean, look at Paul McCartney. I mean, what does he have to prove? But he's
and Mick Jagger, for crying out loud. That guy runs a marathon.
I know. And I mean, the thing about the Allmans too, I mean, I guess they're a lot like the Dead when they were at their peak. I mean, they play for three hours a lot of the time. I mean, it was a long show. And I think when I first heard the Fillmore East albums, maybe it was just a little too much for me, because even though I knew classic rock, I liked music, hearing a 16, 20-minute version of a song, I was just like, I can't really wrap my head around this. I knew the hits, but that's a different animal when you're talking about Jessica and Blue Sky and stuff. So it kind of has taken me a while to sort of settle into that album. But obviously there's a lot there. And I mean, your book really focuses on that. So maybe we're sort of talk about, because it comes out in 1971, correct? Is that right?
Yeah. July of 71.
So maybe just kind of talk about why this album puts them over the top, a little bit of history of maybe the Fillmore East, or, how the Allmans get there and why this album takes off for them.
So, and which is pretty much the crux of the book, right? So the music industry going into this, Duane was signed to Capricorn Records, which was an affiliate subsidiary of Atlantic Records, the big rhythm and blues label. Atlantic, produced albums, but they also sold a ton of singles. They were a hits maker as well. They did 2 albums. The first one, their debut, self-titled, and then Idle Wild South with Tom Dowd, famous producer, did Layla. They were doing that album sort of at the same time that Duane was doing Layla with Clapton. And that was, the first album was, let's just throw out there and see what it does. I'm always amazed. The single they released was Black Hearted Woman, with Every Hungry Woman on the back. And it's to me, it's always like the same song. I was like, man, you had Not My Cross to Bear, Dreams, Whipping Post, and Trouble No More on that album. And they chose the 2, to me, they're good cuts, but not the best. The next record, Idle Wild South, that's got Revival. It's got Liz Reed studio version, but it's real toned down. It sounds ethereal. It sounds a little acoustic and doesn't hit. And the band is playing these, I mean, they were on the road. The legend has it they played 300 shows a year. That is not, I've looked at the schedules. It's not possible. They were on the road for probably close to 300 days a year from 69, 70, and 71. For sure. They were 250, 300 days a year. They were relentlessly playing. And I think one of the best, I went into this, Colin, you've done research before. You're like, what am I going to find? To me, I'm like, this is the greatest band ever. Everybody should be saying, this is the greatest band ever. You have to see them. And honestly, they were saying that, like the accounts were, but they weren't saying it about their records. In fact, most of the people who had seen them live and heard their records said, it just ain't the same. It just ain't the same. And the band realized it. The label did. Phil Walden, their manager, realized. So that's a really interesting piece too, because when they proposed the double album, so the weirdness that goes on here, and I address this somewhat in the book. Phil Walden is the band's manager, their booking agent, and their record label. Atlantic, that's Capricorn. Atlantic, Jerry Wexler distributes Capricorn product, but Wexler has a financial interest in Duane's contract and in the Allman Brothers Band. So they take the tapes to Atlantic and say, we want to put out a double album. And I've got it in the text because I love this line. Wexler says to Walden, not every note is essential to our heritage. And then apparently Walden comes back, I got another one for you. This is the People's Band, and we're going to sell this double album for a single album price. And of course, a record executive like Wexler says, what the hell? Walden made a deal on Gregg's songs on that album for publishing to take a lower cut. And the album sold, I think it was $6.98. I can't remember what a double album single was then, but yeah, it had to be captured on 2 platters. And then the band said single album. And it was FM radio where it caught on, because they could play album cuts. And that's where the hip youth went to listen to music. And they were already seeing them in the towns that, a lot of younger people were seeing them. So then it was like, oh, this is the next best thing. And frankly, listening to it, Colin, yeah, I did a deep ass dive on that album like I had never done before. I'm in the 0.000 something 1% of Allman Brothers fans on Spotify last year, simply because I played that album on repeat.
Oh, yeah.
So much writing it, I've listened to the entire sessions. They recorded 4 shows over the weekend. Most of them came from the later shows. The bulk of the album, the long cuts, come from their last show on the night of 13th, morning of the 14th of March. And by then they had recorded everything, and I think they knew they had enough to patch versions together and stuff. When they were recording, they'd go up and listen after the shows at Atlantic Studios, hear what they had to do the next gig. So that last show, I think that's where Whipping Post comes from. It's definitely where In Memory of Elizabeth Reed comes from Fillmore East. They're really letting loose because all that pressure's gone. They've recorded the album according to them, and they play their very best set last, and that's what some of that stuff ends up on the record.
So you think there's sort of a progression maybe in the late 60s to more jam band type of experiences for people, maybe the Grateful Dead, maybe Cream, because Cream, it's just 3 guys, but obviously they put out a double album in 68, Wheels of Fire. There's some live stuff. There's a 16-minute drum solo. So like these guys are kind of pushing the boundaries a few years before the Allmans come along. Do you just think like there's sort of a combination of events that kind of put them over the top in 71? Obviously they're stellar musicians, but did it just kind of they found the right audience too at the same time? People that want a more, maybe it's sort of post-psychedelic, but they want like a more of an experience, quote unquote, at the concert.
It sounds like you've read into the book, but yeah, that's exactly it. And honestly, I addressed some of this, Colin, and for anybody who's listening, I'm pretty sure Colin's throwing this out here as just a fellow traveler, but I talk about this with the culture, with concerts being participatory, and the audience is important, and it's important to the Allman Brothers. They say it repeatedly. And in fact, Dickey particularly had a real aversion to studios because he felt it was so mechanical and so away from the people, the music that he played to, inspire that. You mentioned Cream. Cream and Eric Clapton are sort of all throughout. I've got Butch Truck said, without Cream, you don't have us. The Dead, huge influence on any band from that era. On the Allman Brothers, maybe different in sound, not an influence as much on sound, except where their bass players come in, but more on aesthetic, about sort of improvisation. The crowd is part of the experience. We play where the muse takes us. Their guidelines are completely different, and that's kind of where it stops. They're Southern psychedelic, which is gonna, to me, I have really. They are psychedelic. Allman Brothers, I think, are psychedelic as shit, but they're a little more focused with it. It doesn't just go, kind of thing. But it is Southern psychedelia, man. It's deep stuff. And so I think you said it. It's a combination of factors. The industry is not really there, but they're, Cream was on Atlantic,
yeah.
So they're aware of Cream. And then, the record buying public, Jefferson Airplane is another huge. So the whole Woodstock thing is going, and the Allman Brothers are slightly behind it, but they don't, I'm not going to say ride the wave, because I really think they kind of forged their own path there. It was the audiences were ready for the album. Phil Walden once said, we thought at one point maybe we were going to have to break them up. They were just too musical, which I think is a phenomenal. And I mean, when I hear it, you're like, damn, man, these guys, if we ever get together and we sit and listen to the record, I can point out, some of those things that are going on deeper than the soloists. And you're like, holy shit. They just had a connect. The record captured it. I mean, today's day and age, it's really hard to think about the importance of an album again,
Well, I can't think of anything preceding it that is quite like it. I mean, are there any double live albums that compare with that before 71?
I don't know. Certainly not. If it is in rock, I'm not sure about like jazz or something like that. But
yeah.
rock, I don't know. Oh, Live Dead.
Okay.
So the Dead did it a year, 2 years, 3 years before I think Live Dead came out in 68 or 69. Similar thing. They had a couple studio records that didn't do well. They owed their record company a lot of money for all the dicking around they'd done in the studio. And they said, okay, we're going to cut a live album. It wasn't the hit that at Fillmore East was, but it was the turning point, or a turning point for them in terms of staying together, staying on the road, and reaching beyond just the listeners.
Now, are there any single hits before Fillmore East? I
Zero.
mean, okay.
None.
Okay.
Midnight Rider might have hit like number 88 for a brief time, but actually I don't think it did. But no, and really their only single hit was Ramblin' Man in 73. Crazy Love hit in 79, I guess, too. But they just were not a singles band.
Yeah.
They were an album band and an FM band and an FM cuts and then a live shows.
Well, it's funny because when I was growing up, they used to have these compilation albums advertised on TV, like Time Life or whatever. And so probably when I was, in elementary school, you'd hear snippets of Ramblin' Man or Midnight Rider or whatever, like on these compilation albums. So you'd maybe hear it on the radio, but you're under this impression that they were a hits band. Then you get a little older, then you see Fillmore East, you're like, no, they were not a hits. It totally misrepresents the band if you are getting the greatest hits in a way. But obviously they did both. But I mean, it's that period of, they call it AOR, album oriented rock.
Yep.
So yeah, they're sort of one of those classic rock bands, for lack of a better term, that you're focused on the albums. You're not focused on a 3-minute hit or whatever, the way the Beatles, Stones, the Doors were, those kinds of people. You don't want to pigeonhole bands and get obsessed with genre, but like, again, when I was growing up, the Allmans were a Southern rock band.
Yeah.
But you used to talk about how that really wasn't used in their early years, or really ever, for most of the history of the band. But where does that come from?
I don't know the origin of the term. I will say I am convinced it's a marketing term that came sometime out as the Allman Brothers were launching Brothers and Sisters in 1973. It might have come out a little earlier. The Nick Cohn, who is British, he wrote a couple very, very, very early books, and the name of the book is escaping me, and it's across the room. He called Southern rockers, and he was referring really like to Little Richard and Fats Domino and Carl Perkins and those guys. He, of course, it's 69, he's writing it, so there's no Allman Brothers he's worried about. Robert Palmer, who wrote Deep Blues and God knows how many else. My favorite book of his was the one that went with called Rock and Roll and Unruly History, which went with the documentary on WGBH. But Robert Palmer was a writer. He was a musician. One of the Memphis rags that he wrote for, he called them Southern blues rockers, but nobody calls them Southern rock until this hits in the mid 70s or early 70s. And then it just became a thing. Alan Paul, who wrote One Way Out, pretty much the definitive biography of the band, and I have talked a little bit about it recently, and it could be it's some of the folks in New York that in the Northeast that were using it, that had suggested the term, but then that begets the Rebel Flag ends up as part of their ensemble and then becomes a real big part of Southern music kind of coming out of that. But they weren't, they're progenitors of what Southern rock is, but they precede it. That's what makes it really weird to talk about them. And for me to talk about them in Southern rock is like, they're a rock band from the South. But there's no definable Southern, sound necessarily. And really there isn't one, except all of these guys are living in the South and stay in the South and make music.
The irony is that they're really like the first major rock band that's integrated, but they have this baggage, whether or not you want to call them Southern rock, like you said, actually the rebel flag starts showing up at concerts. But was that kind of stuff happening when Duane was in the band, or is that a later thing?
Everything I can see is it's a later thing.
Okay.
But in unpacking it, listen, I grew up steeped in the Lost Cause as a kid. Everybody says, oh, less controversial then. Well, less controversial because we ignored what the flag stood for when people were raising it. And Southern men, rock and rollers in particular, surely, were taught, that the Southern cause was right because they were rebelling against, honestly, what they were rebelling against was to create a slaveholding republic. So it's really interesting, there's pictures of the band on stage with the flag in 73, 74, and they had 2 black members from 73 to or late 72 through 76. Actually, and then they had 2 black members from 97 to 2014, but they weren't using the flag anymore at that point. But it was not around that I know of when Duane was doing it. But certainly Georgia's flag was half of the rebel flag at that point, the state flag where they were living in. So it was around.
No, sorry, did you say that the band themselves were flying the flag, or was it just people in the audience?
No, there's at least one picture of them with the flag on stage.
Okay.
No, there's several, and they used it. The flag was used in 73, 74 as on tour merchandise too.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of like again, I'll say this. I don't think it excuses it at all, but shortly thereafter, the Dukes of Hazzard come out with in the early 80s, and they put the flag on the cover on the roof of their car and blah blah blah, and just it was very much an accepted part of culture to such an extent, I think, that the incongruity of an integrated band using the rebel flag, somehow nobody catches very few people catch how terrible the message is. And the musicians themselves are like, yeah, whatever. They don't pay attention to that stuff. But, Gregg later said, if the quote, and I used it, but it's something to the effect of, my best friend in the world is a black man. That's Chank Middleton. And if people see that flag and think of slavery, I say burn every one of them. I don't think Gregg is the definitive voice on any of that, right? But that's how he felt about it. And I think most of them, but they're not embarrassed by it. I don't think they are. I think they're just, they recognize that wasn't cool overall. But back to your question, this is what makes the Allman Brothers, to me, hard to write about, or was they're not Southern rock in the traditional sense from 69 to 71, 72. They are very much what we think of, what I do, Skinnerd, Molly Hatchet, Charlie Daniels Band, Grinder, Switch, Marshall Tucker Band. They're a boogie, blues, jazz band, but very Southern rock. I say from Brothers and Sisters in 1973 all the way through Seven Turns in 1990, they still keep that kind of sound. And they go, Shades of Two Worlds is a lot more psychedelic than Seven Turns was, and the band on stage was vastly different by the time they got rolling in 90, 91, 92. They had sort of regained their feet to their sounds. I don't know, sound is the wrong word. They always sounded like them. There's a decidedly different sound that starts in 73, a lot more country.
And is that because of Dickey, his writing style?
100%.
Yeah.
The band members will say it. 72. Duane dies in October of 71. They were supposed to take a break, and they chose not to. They finished Eat a Peach and they went on a massive tour. When they came back from that, as Dickey they finished Eat a Peach, which was, as I guess, two Dickey songs on it. It's got an instrumental, and then it's got Blue Sky. It's got Libraire in A minor, and then Blue Sky. And then by the time you get to Brothers and Sisters, Dickey's pretty much the musical director of the band from that point, honestly, till they split in 2000. So I think it's Dickey, and it's the time. Country rock, or that sound is happening in coming out of Southern California. The band had always had those roots, and it was I think a natural evolution. Dickey's guitar playing is and writing, especially then, is straight out of like string band music, a lot of Western swing influence. I hear a ton of Don Rich and Buck Owens in what he does and what he did with Duane. Never seen him say it though. By the time they get to Brothers and Sisters, Dickey had really been writing for a long time. He pulled some masterpieces out with Liz Reed and then Libraire and Blue Sky. And so by the time they get to Brothers and Sisters, he's the sole guitarist. They add Chuck Leavell and piano, and I think that adds a lot of that country sound to it too. That the piano really changes their sound, and it complements Dickey's guitar just beautifully. So it sounds really natural, but it is, it's a turn, and that's because their spiritual leader is gone. Their musical leader is gone, and Duane, their spiritual leader, and Barry Oakley dies in November of 72. So the band is kind of left without that, and Dickey stepped into the breach.
Now, as a fan, I mean, maybe this is obvious. Like, are you more partial to the Duane period than the post-Duane period, or you kind of like them equally for different reasons, if that makes sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I think yes to both questions. Definitely, I listened the most to the Duane period and have for many years. But I think one of the things that I really found writing the book, but I found this first as a fan, the band didn't die on October 29th, 1971, when Duane died. They didn't go out as a tribute act and play the hits, quote unquote, adding new people to recreate Duane's parts, and then later Barry's parts, etc. But, like a good jazz ensemble, like the Benny Goodman Orchestra, or even Miles Davis, who didn't really have a steady band, they just kept adding new talent, and they let the talent do what they wanted to. And that kept the music from growing stale in this one period, what it sounded like. So there's a really long tail. Duane's legacy is the Allman Brothers Band. It's not just at Fillmore East. The band outlived him for 43 years, reached 3 different peaks after he was gone. 3 peaks, 2 falls. And had to get rid of Dickey, or split with Dickey in 2000 to keep it going on the road. So of the newer stuff, because they stopped making new music in around 2003, I have a little bit of a harder time getting into specifics of all the live shows that they've released and stuff since, and finding my favorite versions. But I listen to it a lot, and I listen to a lot of the offshoots and the branches. That's kind of my jam a lot of the times, is just music that's influenced by all of that somehow.
If you kind of start with the greatest hits in the Dickey period, when you do listen to the earlier stuff with Duane, they are kind of more of a harder rock, kind of Cream type of band than they would be later. So like Idlewild South, when I first heard that a few years ago, I was like, this is a hard rock album. It's pretty intense.
They I mean, what they called it back then was acid rock, which I was like, we need to bring that term back, man. What happened to that? But yeah, I mean, there's the reviews of their first 2 albums talked about they were driving, hard band, blues. And one of the things that a lot of observers said was, they didn't just recreate the blues. They tapped into something, because at that point, right, the blues was, still to this day known as an African American musical form. that means something very specific to Black communities and to the musicians and their audiences. And the Allman Brothers in that era really captured that well, and a lot of people remarked on that. But it's different. The sound is different. It's always evolving, just like a lot does in life, as we know from studying history.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, as great as Duane was, and Dickey too, obviously, I mean, they're just a great all-around band. I mean, Gregg, obviously he does the organ work, but he's also a pretty good guitar player himself. And when I first hear them or heard them, you think, oh wow, this is phenomenal guitar playing. But then when you listen a little more carefully, listening to the drumming, and I know they had two drummers, but still I'm like, there's some pretty tricky time signatures and stuff like that along these songs. It's not just wailing out the guitar licks. It's like obviously a moving engine with a lot of parts to it. And I think that the rhythm section gets a little overlooked, right?
Oh, without a doubt. And that might be true about a lot of bands, but certainly the Allman Brothers Band. The rhythm section's like the offensive line in football, right? Like it is the absolute, if that goes poorly, nothing else is really going to go very well, especially with a band that takes songs and launches from these maybe more simple song forms and everybody follows along. Duane's very first recruit, Gregg was gone when Duane pulled this band together, but everything says Gregg was always going to come back and be in Duane's band. So his first recruit out of the band, his first two actually were Jaimoe, was a drummer, and then Barry Oakley, who at that point had a band with Dickey Betts back in Jacksonville and didn't want to leave it, called The Second Coming. Those two guys, I never said it right in text in my print, but I'll say it to you. When Duane, so those guys, they got together in Muscle Shoals, the three of them, and played. Jaimoe says it was like the first time he heard Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I swear the hair on the back of my neck went up, and I'm like, oh my God, please somebody find a tape of that, because that is going to be some serious stuff. But Jaimoe was not a real straight ahead in the pocket drummer, which is one reason why he had to leave Otis Redding's band. He's a great timekeeper, but he wasn't at a consistent way. He kept time was not good for rhythm and soul, review. So Duane quits Muscle Shoals, goes back with Jaimoe to Jacksonville to see Barry and recruit him. And Butch Trucks comes into the mix at that point, and they start playing together, and they realize, oh, Duane said something like, there's a lot of things he said about two drummers, one being James Brown had two drummers, but Brown didn't use them at the same time. But I think more than that, Duane said something like, we knew we were going to be playing a lot of music, and we couldn't have one guy just flogging his ass off all night. We needed some help. And then you add Barry Oakley, to me, the unsung hero of the story always is to me is Barry Oakley. And I think it's tragic he gets too little attention. He plays bass every bit as good as Phil Lesh and the Grateful Dead, Jack Cassidy and Jefferson Airplane, Jack Bruce and Cream. That guy never makes the same pass twice on a live out on Fillmore East. I still can't freaking believe it. Like, he's just constantly in communication with everybody. The rhythm section is holding it down. And if you can hear it, you can hear how the different drummers do things. I was born deaf in my right ear, so I actually have struggled to separate the drums out because I can't quite place where things are. The bass, I can, and I'm learning how to discern the others. So in any band like this, I guess I should say, Colin, to wrap up what you said, right, the sexy part is the lead guitar player wailing or the singing. Gregg is a phenomenal vocalist and a really great songwriter, and especially in this era, his keyboards had a specific role. They weren't a solo instrument, but he was comping all night, and it's wonderful. But for a band like that to work, you said it best. I'll bring it all the way back. There's a lot going on behind that soloist, and they all recognized that. All five of those guys. One of the pictures I put in the book was specific because you can see, all six of them. You can see four guys looking at Dickey with, I have it sitting right here with Jaimoe looking at his drums, but they're all concentrating on each other. And man, that's one of the reasons I love live music and improvisational music, because I love watching how the musicians do their thing. They call audibles or flick no look passes just like quarterbacks and point guards, and it's fun as hell to watch. Like, You can only listen to it with the early Allman Brothers. It's not a lot of video, but it all depends on each guy knowing his part and playing it really well, and an aesthetic that says you do what you want as long as it sounds good in the context of this band. And that's an aesthetic that's stuck all the way through 45 years history of the band.
Well, and you've been in bands too, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you still have a band?
I have a long-standing band called Jam Depression with my best friend who's down in Florida, and it is mostly garage type situations. So no, I've been in a band for many years, but it is a little passion project.
Okay. Well, I'll speak for myself. When you start playing music, you get a whole new appreciation of how good these guys are, because you grew up with the 3-chord myth, like, oh, they're playing 3 chords, it's just rock guitar. But then, and obviously someone like the Allman Brothers, you're just like, this is unbelievable. I don't know how these guys do
that Colin, that's what did it for me. Like that was it. I played guitar, I was a guitar player, I heard it, and I was like, holy shit, this is different. and as a guitar player, man, it has been hard, because I was in my 20s. I had been playing at that point for about 10 years. I was in college, chasing the dream, met my wife, and really didn't pursue guitar like these guys did. So like, to me, my guitar playing always wanted, and my music always wanted, because these guys were just, like you said, they were so good. I'm always amazed by non-musicians who love them, because as a musician, I know what they're doing is how hard it is, like literally, like, and non-musicians who can hear it. And by the way, you mentioned the rhythm section. All my friends who are huge Allman Brother fans, who aren't musicians, love the drums.
Yeah.
And so, I was in New Mexico this summer with my daughter was doing an internship, and we went to the Pueblo Cultural Center, and they talked about the drum. And I know enough about African drumming and African American history to know why that's so important. So there's something there you captured by bringing it up with their drumming and their rhythm section that's just very deep and affects a lot of people.
Yeah.
I blew the ending on that one, but I think you get the point.
No, absolutely. I mean, and that so much of it is live music. I mean, whether it's all like a straight through performance at Fillmore East, they're from different sets or whatever, but like they're playing it live. I mean, it's not overdubbed and stuff like that. Yeah, and
on Fillmore East, that is, and this is something else that I've got it. I'm gonna write this eventually, bring back the live album, because that's a curated record. That is not, and it's not mixed like a concert, like Get Your Yayas Out, which sounds like it's a Rolling Stones concert, right? Each song is mixed individually. They fade out tracks and fade in tracks. So I mean, it's over the course of several nights, and the only that there's 2 things on it. They patched 2 versions of You Don't Love Me, and they patched right in the middle, right when Dickey and Duane switched. And then on Stormy Monday, they took out a harmonica solo. I think that was just a fit on the record. This is a pretty good solo, actually.
Yeah, no, they're a phenomenal band without a doubt. And like you mentioned Black Hearted Woman earlier, which maybe didn't really work as a single, but like I've listened to that song a lot, and just like if I were trying to play that on drums, like following those changes, it's a very tricky, weird, like kind of going between these different parts of the song that come together, but like it's really tricky, even for someone that kind of knows what they're doing as a musician, to play like that. And maybe it was not quite pop enough to be a good single, but I mean, just again and again with their music, and having the syncopated lead guitarist is just kind of phenomenal to listen to. And you just never really get sick of it. I don't know about you, how many times you've heard Fillmore East, but like you can pretty much put that on any day of the week and still enjoy it.
It's not background music because it's intense.
Fillmore East, how does that rank as a seller? Does it go gold? Does it go platinum? How many?
I don't know how many times platinum. It went gold before Duane died. Like I think they had just gotten notice and then he died. Okay. So that's 500,000 copies. Their bestseller, according to Wikipedia, is Decade of Hits. which is hilarious to me considering it's my entree and their best album. But I'll tell you this, they've released, I mean, you talk to any Allman Brothers fan, most of us have 7 or 8 different versions of that album. They just kept releasing it in different formats and functions and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Was that after they called it quits the first time? Was that like an 80s compilation, the greatest hits? Like on CD, maybe?
So Decade of Hits came out on CD, and I'm assuming it was their first greatest hits was an album Capricorn put out, called The Road Goes On Forever. That was a double album sometime in the mid 70s, probably 76 or 77. I don't know the genesis of this greatest hits thing at all. I can look that up, but I'm assuming it was a CD compilation made for the CD era.
Yeah, because it's pretty long. It's like a double play.
I bet it's 78
album.
Minutes.
Yeah.
Or so. I was just going to see if there's a date. 1991.
All right. Yeah. Well, that all makes sense. Because I mean, to have put that out in the vinyl period, that would have been a double album, and that's a lot for people to listen to back on vinyl. But CD it totally made more sense. And I think that was the first album I ever got. It's that blue and gold one, right? Isn't it?
Yep.
Blue? Well, maybe to kind of wrap up, like, I know you probably would have written this book regardless of what's been put out there, but like, how does this kind of fit with other things that have been written about the Allmans? I've read Gregg's memoir, but like, is there any other kind of scholarship really on this band?
To this extent, no. A historian named Ken Hay did a documentary on them sometime in the 70s. I tried to track him down, actually, never reached him. I don't think it ever released. There's 3 books of biography, and I'm definitely not dissing my colleagues. They're all done by journalists. Tom Nolan, who now writes for Wall Street Journal, wrote a really thin book that Sire Records put out. They were doing a bunch of those in the 70s. Then in the mid 90s, a reporter named Scott Freeman did a book called Midnight Riders. That was kind of the first book that came out on them. And the band absolutely hated it. I felt bad for Scott because I thought it was a good book. Okay, and then the third one is Alan Paul wrote One Way Out, and I can't remember when that came out, 2014 maybe. Those 3 books, I'll say, the way that I put them in my, the way that I thought about them, Nolan's book was written when the band they were the top band in the land. And so it was some good stories in there, some good beginnings. Freeman did a lot of primary source work in the 80s when the band was at their nadir. And so there's a lot of uncertainty in the conclusions that the band is making. It comes out while the band is successful, but much of that work was done before they had reformed in 89. So it's got this somewhat duotone at parts, and then he went really deep into the scandals that broke the band up, and it's good reporting. I think the band was mad that he did it. That's the best I can tell. And then Alan wrote what is sort of an it's an oral biography. Alan is also a journalist, and I mean, this book, 200-300 400 pages, really good insights from a lot of insiders. Then there's Galadriel, Duane's daughter, wrote a book called Please Be With Me, which is by far my favorite book on the Allman Brothers. I've read all of these a lot. And then one biography on Duane, which is called Skydog, and it's again mostly a straight tale, front to back kind of deal.
Okay.
Yeah. So no, not that, I mean, I was thinking about this in prep for all of this book launch. I think I'm the first new person to write something on them outside of the immediate family and immediate band since Randy Poe wrote his book in 2008. And mine's not a biography of the band. It's a biography of the music and sound and how it got to where we are today.
And maybe just talk about that quickly. Like, what happens with the breakup when Dickey leaves? Is it just creative differences, or just sick of it, or they couldn't stand each other? What happens there in around 2000?
I'll tell you what I heard. The Dickey was not playing as well, and he wasn't playing in the context of the band as well as he had. And I think the band got tired of it. Okay. I know there was a tremendous amount of turmoil going on behind the scenes. I know that, and I know this from studying this band for this long, but in period, right? Bands are like marriages. You get married when you're really super young, and now you're stuck with that person, right? It's because you make your money creatively doing it, and it makes it tough. And those guys had resentments that went back to the mid 70s. Alan's book has a great quote from Jaimoe. So long story short, they toured without Dickey in summer 2000. When they told him they were doing that, I don't really know what they said, but Dickey took it as, you're kicking me out of the band. And as I understand it, the legal agreement called for them to go into arbitration if they had an issue. They went to arbitration, and the arbitrator ruled in favor of the 3 remaining members of the band, that they could carry on, and Dickey was out, and they had whatever financial agreement. It was ugly. It remained ugly. And Dickey went off and did his own thing, and the Allman Brothers very quickly recovered. They toured that summer, and then summer 2000 with Jimmy Herring, and Derek Trucks on guitar. And then 2001, Warren Haynes came back, and he had just lost Alan Woody in Government Mule the previous fall. And Woody and Warren had played with the Allman Brothers in summer 2000 for the first time since they had left the band a couple years earlier. Chuck Leavell came back and played. Eventually, he was the piano keyboard player on Brothers and Sisters and Win, Lose or Draw. Now he's with the Stones. And, the band kept going for 13 more years. They celebrated their 30th anniversary with Dickey in 99, and then their 40th and 45th were without him.
Was he having some problems with substance abuse?
I mean, I honestly, Colin, I don't know,
Okay.
but it would not surprise me. These guys are, I forget sometimes, right? Because they're everyday normal people, but they're artists, and Dickey is an artist. So it's hard to tell, right? What is an artistic temperament? What is substances? What is personality? What is circumstance or whatever else? Dickey stayed on the road playing, but it was different. The Allman Brothers, I've always said this, were his primary creative outlet. But I'll tell you this, by 2000, they hadn't recorded an album in 6 years. They had replaced Warren and Woody with O'Teal Burbridge and Jack Pearson, and then were just continued to tour and add new songs here and there. Jack left the band in 99, and Derek toured with him, and by the next year, Dickey and the band had split ways.
Well, because I know Gregg, I mean, he had problems with alcohol for a long time. I'm not sure when he finally got sober. I'm sure it wasn't helping things at whatever point.
The common line was around the band was, when Gregg had problems, he was inward and sullen, and he just did his own thing. They could turn his organ down and keep his mic going. When Dickey was on a bender, Dickey was a lot more hot-tempered, always was. And it was a little harder you could tell. There's concerts where he was just wailing, playing so much louder than the band, and really not in tune with in tune sonically, obviously, but that they weren't on the same vibe at all. But Gregg struggled with alcoholism and drug addiction almost his entire life.
Yeah.
A lot of musicians do. A lot.
Yeah. Well, if Dickey ever does get out there again, I would love to see that. Probably will never happen, but
I'll tell you this.
Got to see him.
Saw him.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this. I am not one to chase. Like I like music I like, and I like music for what it is, not what it's not. When I see Duane Betts, his son, play, and I've said this for 25 years now, he looks like Dickey in his prime. He sounds like him, but it's nature. I don't think Duane Betts ever said, I'm gonna go sound like my dad. He just sounds like his dad because half his DNA is his dad, and his dad is a great guitar player. But I don't know that you're gonna see him play again. I would, though, I'm gonna tell you, I would go catch Duane Betts he's left the Allman Brothers Band, at least they're on hiatus, and he's got his own little thing going. And man, I saw an acoustic show here a month or so ago in Nashville. It was just phenomenal. Great stuff. But I hear you. Like I saw B.B. King one time. I was a little disappointed he didn't play a lot of guitar, and I'm really glad I saw this many years later. Just like I saw B.B. King. I saw Dickey Betts a number of times, and I'm glad for it for sure.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. Especially nowadays with a lot of these classic rock guys, like, you don't want to waste any time if you want to see them, because they're 70s and 80s now,
Yeah, if they can still play. I mean, the jazz guys, right? Those guys are playing into their, Sonny Rollins, and we just lost Pharoah Sanders, and rock and roll's different, for sure. But the Allman Brothers, that kind of thing is you get up there and you just play. You're not dancing around, you're not showing off. You're just getting up there in your work clothes, your street clothes, and you're just playing music,
Right.
Honestly, some of these Pierre Allman books I've read, Scott Freeman's book, God damn, I bet I've read that every 2 years since 95, if not once a year.
Wow.
I just love the way that, and it's just, I'm one of those guys who'll reread books, and grad school started it, man. The first time, you read a book a week. You're like, I don't even know what the hell I'm reading. I'm just cranking out stuff. Then I finished. I'm like, ooh, I want to read a book. And I would read music books, or I'd read sports, like, Season on the Brink and shit like that, just to flush my brain. I didn't even realize what I was doing was prepping all of this work for writing this book. Reading music books helped me actually write a music book, which I had never thought about before. I was just reading.
No, absolutely.
Knowledge.
Like your book, like there's nothing like that in grad school, like, and I hope, again, now that historians are writing these kind of books, the university presses, it's academic, people will assign these books because it's a cool, fun topic. It's also pretty brief, but there's like actual history. There's true context here.
Yeah, thank you. I tried for that. Like, that was the one thing the other books are definitely missing, was context. Historical context. It's your sweet spot. It's my sweet spot. It's not enough to me that the Allman Brothers were great, or that At Fillmore East was a great album, or that Duane was a groundbreaking Southern guitarist, artist, etc. The why of that question is what drove the book. It drives me about a lot of things. Facts are blah, or a story is this, but what does it mean? That's a historian's role, right? Is to interpret what that means. So I spent real money on an index for that very reason. I wrote chapter intros and chapter conclusions for the same reason, so that if a student or if a historian gets it, they can do the skim that we're used to doing and get a general sense of the book for that purpose, but also for readers to continue to provide context, as they go through to make the story flow. I edited History News magazine for 10 years and was managing editor of our book series. And the number one thing that writers struggle with is transitions. And so I thought a lot about that as I did this too. How do I transition from not just paragraph to paragraph, but also chapter to chapter? And I built the book somewhat that way to help people like you and me who are just going to grab it and quickly get some context, or maybe not people like us, but our colleagues who are going to grab a book and just grab some context real quick and go. I tried to make it as easy as possible, but as I started at the beginning, I left myself in it, as much as I could that wasn't annoying, starting with the fact that I am extremely biased about this band and how great they are. I just owned up to that up front. No argument.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you wrote about something you wanted to write about. Like, I think some books you're sort of reading it and you're like, it's just so unemotional. There's just no passion behind what they're talking about. But obviously that comes through here and makes it a lot more fun to read. So
thank you. That was my goal.
Yeah, good. And so I'm enjoying it. Look forward to finishing it. And good luck with everything. I know October's probably a good month to be down in Florida if you're visiting there. So
yeah. And I go to New York next week for a week of Tedeschi Trucks Band concerts. So I'm excited.
Cool. All right.
Keep in touch.
All right, that was my talk with Bob Beatty. I hope you enjoyed that. Once again, the book is Play All Night, Duane Allman and the Journey to Fillmore East, available from University of Florida Press, going for about $20 in paperback. You can get it on Amazon, everywhere else where you can get books. So it was nice talking with Bob. I enjoyed talking about classic rock and music generally, but certainly Allman Brothers is one of my favorite bands who I have enjoyed for a long time. So it's fun to read about them, and I'm glad these kind of scholarly books are coming out right now. This has been American Rambler. I am Colin Woodward, the author of Marching Masters, Slavery, Race, and the Confederate Army, available through University of Virginia Press, and the author of Country Boy, The Roots of Johnny Cash, available through University of Arkansas Press. You can get both of those books on Amazon. Still waiting to hear about the paperback for Marching Masters, but hopefully that'll be available some point this year. Haven't heard anything for a little while. And hoping the Country Boy audiobook will be out soon. And I'll be giving a talk on Cash and Country Boy for the Six Bridges Festival. That'll be happening on the 27th of October. That is a Thursday, and that will be in the afternoon. So if you want to hear me do that, check out the Six Bridges Festival online. There are going to be a lot of authors there. John Waters is going to be there. Megan Kate Nelson, who's been on the podcast. She's a Civil War historian. She will be, I assume, talking about her most recent book, or recent books. They weren't too far apart, but she has written a lot about the Trans-Mississippi and the U.S. Western parts, her scholarship. So there will be a lot of talented people there talking about many different things and promoting their books. So if you don't want to listen to me, you can listen to someone else and get some book ideas. So check that out. The Six Bridges Festival, that will be October 27. All right. I will be talking with you soon. Take care. Bye.